So I panicked. I didn't know um, what to do. So I grabbed him and I ran next door to a neighbor. Now, where I stayed at, I had only been over there for like 4 months, and none of the residents there knew me. So she opened her door because it was late, and she told me that she couldn't help me. Her kids were in the bed asleep, and she pretty much closed the door in my face. So I went downstairs. I was screaming, trying to get, somebody in that apartment complex to help me. When I did that, a young lady from the inn apartment came and asked me what was wrong and grabbed my son and took him in the apartment, and she put him on the floor and she started CPR. When she did that, I was in such a panic. I was just trying to get the best, anybody that would help me really, because I had no car, I had no phone. So I ran and got some people to come to the door. They came to the door and um, decided to take me to the doctor, to the hospital rather. I ran back in to get little Walter. When I ran back in to get him, she told me to hold his nose, press in his stomach, and blow in his mouth. Well, later I found out that that was the wrong way. So I applied adult CPR to a 9-month-old all the way to the hospital. I was scared, and I just, I did what I thought was right at the time. When I got to the hospital, um, all kind of thoughts started going through my mind. I was like, man, you are in so much trouble because you left your son at the house by himself, and they're going to lock you up. But never in a million years did I think that I would be charged with murder. That was the furthest thing from my mind. I was like, you know, I never thought about that at that age. So they took my son from me and they took him to the back. I just paced. I was walking around trying to figure out, what was wrong with him and all this kind of stuff. But in the back of my mind, I was saying to myself, you can't be honest. You can't tell the truth. They're going to lock you up. They're going to say, you left your son at the house. So I just thought of, I'll lie about it. And that's what I did through the whole entire thing. They asked me what was going on and everything, and I lied. So they told me to go down to the police station. I went down to the police station. A friend took me, and I still wasn't truthful. So after that happened, they said I wasn't under arrest. So I went home that night. I just couldn't figure out what was going on. I just didn't have a clue as to, why this was happening, what was wrong with my son, and I was just a mess. So the next morning, I got up and I went back to the hospital with a friend to see what an autopsy report said, not knowing that an autopsy report takes a while to find the cause of death. So when I got there, the detectives were there and they said to me, we need to take you back down for more questioning. They put me in a police car. First thing was said was that, I sure hate you in this kind of trouble. They carried me to the police station. When I got there, they escorted me into this room, and right off the bat, they were yelling and screaming at me. They were, telling me I stomped and killed my baby, all this kind of thing. And this went on for like 4 hours, and I'm sitting here trying to figure out, why are these people saying this? I didn't kill my son. I'm trying to explain to them, that I didn't. It was so scary to me, because this had never happened to me before, that I didn't really understand what was going on. When they read me my rights, I thought that the right to remain silent meant to be quiet until spoken to. Um, After a while, he shoved the paper in my face and he told me to sign it. And I just signed it because I wanted it to end, not knowing that that was going to be, me fighting for the rest of my life. Um, so after I signed it, I didn't sign in the place that he told me to. I tried to do it. It was my one last act of defiance. So I signed at the bottom of the paper. When I did that, they charged me with capital murder in the course of child abuse. Mind you, they charged me with a child abuse law that wasn't even a law until 23 days after they arrested me. So they sent me to the county jail, and I stayed in the county jail for a whole year. Never met my attorneys until 2 days before trial. Didn't have trial preparations, didn't know what I was supposed to do. All I was told to do was sit before the jury and look at the jury. One of my attorneys was drunk during the whole trial. He was popping candy. He kept saying, we got this thing nipped in the bud, as I pleaded for to take the stand in my own defense. They wouldn't let me do that. And so the case kept going. The district attorney made me out to be the worst person in the world. I was this monster. I had beat my baby to death, and I did all these horrible things to my child. And I had to sit there, and endure that type of, conversation of coming from him, so that he could get a conviction. Well, he did get a conviction. They sentenced me to die. They found me guilty March 13th of 1990. My death date was July the 2nd of 1990. And when I made it to death row, I was 19 years old. I thought my world was over. I didn't know what else to do. They had taken everything, every sense of anything I thought was real away. I mean, here I am trying to get help for my son, and I was called a murderer. Just imagine you being put on death row for a crime you never committed. You only, sure, I wasn't an upscale teenager as far as knowing everything, but I have been on my own since I was 14, and I was trying to be a mother to a young child. I had 2 sons, actually. My oldest son was with his grandmother. But this was one of the hardest things that I had to endure, coming from the injustice in the state of Mississippi. My case was overturned in 1992. I ended up with 2 sets of attorneys who came in and found out that my son had heart problems, kidney problems, and chronic bowel syndrome. It was nothing that I had never did to cause his death. I served 6.5 years, 2 years, 9 months on death row, 6.5 years altogether. And, even though I was exonerated and free, I became the first woman in the United States to be exonerated. My life was still a mess. And it's not over after exoneration. So I will yield to the next person to possibly ask questions or have anything else, that they would like to say.
I have many questions. So you said that you were only one of 2 women who have ever been exonerated. What do you think the difference is between being a woman on death row and being a man on death row?
Well, a woman is not looked at it like that. Now, I'm not saying that this is the way everybody thinks, but this is my personal opinion. I feel like a lot of people think that a woman's job is at home in the kitchen. You know what I mean? And we're not capable of doing these things that, people are charging us with. And so it's not as serious as opposed to a male. They look at the guy as this big, strong guy, monster type, whatever, as far as Black people are concerned. And, that's the way they see it. But they don't see that as far as women are concerned. And that is just not the case, because we lose it. I lost my son. It took me 2 years to find out where he was buried. I never got to grieve him. I was, I'm his mother, and I'm accused of killing my own child, So it's a deep impact on women as well as men.
So you belong to an organization called Witness to Innocence. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Witness to Innocence is an organization that is comprised of nothing but death row exonerees. We come together as a whole to try to show what happens to wrongfully incarcerated people. We're innocent, and we have been had to endure so many years of incarceration and the mental anguish that has done. We have PTSD. They have no laws for exonerees to receive compensation back then for wrongful conviction. And, it's no reentry programs for exonerees. And I think that is one of the worst things that we can, do to a society as a whole. You're taking your own people and you're incarcerating them, and Blacks especially at an alarming rate. And that's kind of sad. That's sad to me. I want to show you Kirk Bloodsworth, who is the director. He's also an exoneree who made these. If you can see it, I want to hold it closer. These are our exonerated rings. I don't know if you can see
Go
that.
the other way. You had it right the first time. There
I had it right the first
time.
There
you go.
All right. These are rings that he made for all of us. You know what I mean? And it's just something that binds us together. We love each other as sisters and brothers. It doesn't matter about your race, color, anything like that. We're just trying to promote change. And that's basically what Witness to Innocence is about. Sister Helen Prejean is the one who found it. Ray Chrome is the one that helped her with this. And so we just try to get our message out to as many people who will listen.
That's great. Thank you. So you touched on race.
Yeah.
This is, I think, a unique moment in American history. And I'm wondering, what are you feeling optimistic about, and what are you feeling whatever the opposite of optimistic about in terms of the current?
Well, I feel optimistic about this situation is that because in my lifetime, I have never seen such a group of all races come together and form one bond to try to fix a systemic problem that we are having all across the world. That right there, it makes me feel good to know that we're all one family. It doesn't matter about your color. Wrong is wrong. It doesn't matter how you do it. Wrong is wrong. So, I say that to say not all the police officers are bad. We have good men and women out there who are putting their lives on the line every day to protect us. But then we have those that are really bad and they should not be on the force. Then I just think that we need to change this. I mean, because it's going to get worse if we don't. And I think that we should. And then as far as what was the other question? You said,
what are you feeling optimistic about, and what are you, I guess, fearful about?
My fear is that if it doesn't turn out right, what will happen in the crossfires? That is my fear. And will anything change? That's the biggest fear. And what can I tell my children? I mean, I have young children. I have a 17-year-old daughter. I have a 22-year-old son that is in the Army. What could I say, to protect them? Are they going to be accosted by the same things? These type of things going to happen to them? So it's really sad that we have to have these type of conversations with our children. But unfortunately, that is the world we live in today.
Okay, thank you. That's great. Are there questions in the chat that I have been ignoring? I see we have a couple on Facebook. So you just had a graduation yesterday?
Yes,
with
my
one
daughter
of your
graduated.
children?
Yes, she's 17-year-old Nikiria. She graduated. She graduated early, actually. She started taking all of her courses in the 9th grade, and she's going to school, college a year early. So I am so proud of her. I was very happy. Thank you for that question. I appreciate that.
Sure. That was someone on Facebook who I think must have seen
Thank
that in
you.
the preview.
Thank you.
So I know that you've met Brian Stevenson, and he has said that the opposite of justice is poverty. And do you agree with him that wealth, not culpability, is what shapes the outcomes in our justice system?
Absolutely. I agree 100%.
Can you talk a little more about that? What is the impact?
What can you do? What can you do in poverty? Nothing but strive for the want, this or that. And out of poverty brings a lot of different problems. And, lack of education, lack of skills. If you educate the public, if you educate our youth, then you will see a decrease in all of this other stuff that you say that is a problem for us, like crime and violence. An educated community don't do that. You know what I mean? I just feel like if you educate us, give us the same thing that is afforded to everyone else. That's what I feel like. And as long as we are separated by that, then you're going to always have problems. And I just think that is so wrong. I mean, that's in housing. That's in anything. Anything that the system has anything to do with. And I don't think it should be like that. I mean, because we're all people at the end of the day. I mean, you have to work as a whole to create something.
So the other thing that I was thinking about, Sabrina, is when we look at who ends up on a jury in a capital case, and you mentioned that was an issue in your jury. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
The reason why I mentioned that is because I did not have a jury of my peers. When they say a jury of your peers, okay, well, with a 17-year-old or 18-year-old looking at that, what does that look like? That does not look like, that's supposed to be people like me, but that wasn't people like me. The jury, I noticed on my first trial, had no They didn't pay attention to anything that my attorneys were saying. But I fought my attorneys too because they did not put on any evidence. They didn't call any witnesses in my case. I think that the jury was more so leaning toward the district attorney because he just said all the things that he wanted to say at that time. And my concern and my feeling is that when they did the autopsy report on my son, Mississippi did not have enough money to do a proper autopsy report. So they throw something together. How in the world can you sentence somebody to death and accuse me of killing my child when you didn't have the microscopic slides? You did not do a proper autopsy report to see what my son actually died from. You had related to the cause. That doesn't make sense to me. How could you do that to a person, take their life from them, throw them in prison, and then now I'm out? I'm still having to go through, hey, all these years that I've missed, you don't know what I would have been. So it was, yes, it was racism. It played a huge role in my case. And I think it was done for self-gratification. He wanted to make a name for himself, and he used my case to do that. And that's sad. That's really sad. That's abuse of power, in my opinion.
So why did it take so long for you to be able to convince people that you in fact were innocent? What are the complications in the process?
Well, the way that I think that it went, even though they didn't, in my first attorneys, the main attorney did not call any people in my defense. He was able to write a brief in my going to the Supreme Court, which Clive Stafford Smith and Rob McDuff argued before them. That was one, effort that I applaud him for. At least he did that. And so when they saw all the things that were going on, the Supreme Court did, that made a huge difference in me getting a chance to go back into court and to present my case the way it should have been in the first place. That's how I was able. And out excusing that, I was also writing everybody that I thought I could write to, let them know what Mississippi was doing. And my mother became a soldier on the streets, talking to everyone, getting out the message as much as she could. She kept me in the media, and that is what I think helped save my life.
I would tend to agree with you. Were you the only woman that was on death row in Mississippi?
Not at the time. No, I wasn't. I was not. I was the youngest. The youngest.
Interesting. So I asked why it took so long, but in fact, relatively speaking, it didn't take long at all. So I want to switch over to Akin and ask you to maybe you could start with timing and why cases take so long, and then we'll come back with more questions for you as well.
Yeah, sure. Kathleen, it's always good to be here with you, and particularly to hear Ms. Butler Smith's remark. I call her Sabrina, so I might switch back into that person. But you're exactly right to pick up from there. She's actually one of the lucky ones. And that is a very, very weird statement to make based on what we just heard. Typically, it would take 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years before any relief comes. And that's it. And that's exactly, I think the average length of time is 22 years for someone to be exonerated. The reason is we have a very complicated legal system. And that means is once there is a verdict, once there's a sentence, like a death sentence in her case, what happens is it goes up on appeal. And everything that happens from that point forward simply means we confirm that death sentence. Mm-hmm. One of the most interesting things and the weirdest things, even for a lawyer like me to wrap my head around, let alone other people who don't study law, is that being innocent does not bar you from being executed in this country.
It don't.
That is straight up law. In fact, one of the Supreme Court justices who has now passed made that very clear, that just because you're innocent doesn't mean you cannot be executed.
Absolutely.
That matters as a matter of law is that you received a fair trial. So as long as you got a fair trial, not a good trial, not a perfect trial, a fair trial, that's good enough for you to be executed. So what happens is there's an appellate process, and then it goes to the state Supreme Court. And in almost every case, when when that's affirmed, that individual can then appeal to the federal courts in the federal system. And the case will take years and they languish away. And during that entire time, the person remains in prison. They remain on death row. They remain in solitary confinement or whatever other kind of confinement they're being held in situations that many of us can simply not imagine. That takes time, that takes energy, that takes money, that takes resources. So the cases languish for more than several decades. And that's why, again, in her case, 6 years is on the lower end of the spectrum. When we typically see is a lot higher than that. Talking a little bit about what happened in her case and what happens in capital cases in general, I like to start with some numbers to give a sense of what we're talking about here. At the end of the movie Just Mercy, there was an interesting statistic written there, and it was right before the credits roll. And I wrote it down. And what it says is, for every 9 persons executed in this country, 1 person on death row is exonerated. Again, that means for every 9, 1 is exonerated. For those of you who like math, that means 10%. To think about it in other ways is, imagine if for every 9 Tylenol pills in your bottle, you're fine. It cures your headache. But if you take one, that 10th one, it might kill you. Certainly, you wouldn't imagine that the FDA or any other agency would permit that kind of drug to be on the market. Similarly, if every 10 planes that fly, 9 of them will reach the destination, but 1 of them will just drop from the sky. Surely we would hope that the Federal Aviation Authority or some kind of authority would prevent that airline from flying that kind of airplane, because it is just untenable. But yet, in this country, where 10% of people who are on death row and can be executed are exonerated, it happens in many of our states that this is an acceptable thing in society. And that's something we have to think about. Other statistics for us to think about more broadly when we see about the causes of this is racism, quite frankly, right? The Bureau of Justice statistics tell us that 1 out of every 3 Black kids that are being born now should expect to be in jail or in prison. The reason the criminal record is important here is that it creates a permanent underclass of people who cannot work a certain job, who cannot go to a certain school. And in fact, if they go to school, they might even be denied financial aid during that process. So again, first, they can't get a job, they can't get an education. They also, in many states, can't vote, although the efforts are underway to change those laws. So what we have is we create a permanent class of people who are now 2nd or 3rd class citizens and cannot move up. In those group, of course, and sadly, it is mostly people of color and mostly African Americans. That's our prison population, all right? America has about only 5% of the world's population. Yet, when we talk about the world's prison population, it is now ballooned to over 25%. So in the United States, when we look at the entire world, more than 25% are prisoners, and they all come from this country, and we're only about 5% of the world. So the disparity there is high. Mm-hmm. Talking about the death penalty specifically here, 35% of people that are executed in this country are African Americans, they're Black. 35%. But yet, when we look at the overall population, we're talking about African Americans tend to hover around the 12 to 13.5%. So that's more than double. Those are the statistics, and they bear it out. When we talk about death sentences also in this country, and we use the comments Sabrina made earlier, it starts from the initial process. Who begins the investigation on the case? What values did it bring to it? And how do we charge these cases? I, in addition to many other scholars who have studied the death penalty and have looked at its statistics, Here's what we find are some of the driving force. We should talk about this while we also talk about the numbers. On one category, we can talk about people that are charged of crimes that carry death penalty, homicide cases, murder cases. The driving force to know who is going to get the death penalty virtually has nothing to do with the nature of the crime. For instance, we know murder is bad, right? But we also know that not all murders are the same. It's not the same if you kill 10 people. It's not the same if you're a terrorist, for instance. And it's not the same if you shoot someone while you're robbing a liquor store and the gun is discharged during that process. So you would think someone who's a serial killer would get the death penalty. But for instance, Son of Sam and Ted Kaczynski, they're not on death row. So the idea that people think the worst of the worst people of offenses mean you would get the death penalty simply isn't true. So what does get people the death penalty? The numbers bear this completely clear. When you look at the race of the defendant or the accused, we thought for the very longest time that would be the reason that someone would get a death penalty. So for instance, is it a white male? Is it a black male? Is it a Latinx male or female? And then we look at the race, we look at the gender. What we found is majority of the people who got the death penalty were in fact African Americans or black male. But that also isn't the largest driver. It's clear, but it wasn't the largest driver. The biggest factor then, we also looked at the race of the victim. The race of the victim, the gender of the victim, and we ran all kind of statistical and regressional analysis, and we isolated for different factors. And what was also clear is that the race of the victim also has an impact on who gets a death penalty. And I can talk numbers all day, and I can bore you with the numbers all day, but here is the highlight of it. When you look at the race of the defendant or the accused, and if that person is a black male, and then you look at the race and gender of the victim, if that person is a white female, that tells you you are 3.5 times more likely to get a death sentence.
That's terrible.
Just the numbers. You don't need to worry about whether someone's a serial killer. You don't need to worry about anything else. All you got to think about is if you're a black male and you're accused of killing a white female, you're in that highest category, and you're 3.5 times more likely to get a death sentence. It doesn't get any better from there, because again, if you're a black male and you're charged with any person who's white, it still goes up but less margin. But that's this group of people that get a death sentence. So those are the issues of race that plays into the death penalty. People sometimes think that the death penalty is imposed by people who have some kind of special training, whether they're lawyers, whether they're judges, whether they're some kind of a scientist or the like. Here is really what comes in at a capital trial. A group of citizens, 12 people, they listen to a case, they hear it. And at the end of it, they don't get to hear that a serial killer who killed 30 people, who tortured them, didn't get the death penalty. They don't get to compare this case as to other cases in which the person got the death penalty or didn't get the death penalty. All they hear is the facts of a case as presented by the government, and they determine if this, based on what we just heard, does this person deserve the death penalty? And it sounds like, okay, it seems like a fair system. Let's just put 12 people together. Let's put them in a box and let them decide, right? It sounds almost democratic in a sense. But then that would not be understanding how the process really works. So let's talk about that for a minute. Sabrina talked earlier about jury selection and how in America you're supposed to get a jury of your peers. And you heard that she didn't get a jury of her peers. In most death penalty cases, I can also tell you how it's going to work. And it's not because I'm some kind of a genius, it's because it's just the way it works. It works an overwhelming majority of the time. And the way is, when you look at the jury, the composition of the jury, there is a jury that is all white. It generally comes out to be a death sentence. In fact, when the Capital Jury Project, who studied this for a very long time, says you're 5 times as likely, more like likely to get the death penalty when you have more than 4 white males on a jury. So when we look at this, the jury is set in, and they are basically headed for the death penalty just by their race, in how they view evidence. There's another component that plays into this, other than just the race of it. It's us, the lawyers. It's the legal system. It's the government. And it's an important point we should talk about. You heard earlier, we just pick a jury. And some of you get a jury sermons and you see it, it inconveniences your day. You might toss it in the trash, or you might call your loved ones, someone like me, and say, hey, how can I get out of this? And I should tell you, I tell none of my loved ones, you're not getting out of jury duty. You are, in fact, going. All right? But what happens practically is people go to court and they get a summons to appear on the jury. They get there and they sit in this jury box, and then they're selected. Here's what you don't know that the lawyers do. The lawyers, particularly the prosecutor, have training in how to pick a jury. So let me give you a real life example. And if you want, you can email me or you can just YouTube this yourself, okay? How is a jury picked? In the case of life and death, there are 12 people that determines whether a human being will live or die, right? You would expect and hope that that process means 12 people come to court and they will not be tampered with in any way, and you just get to hear the evidence in court. Well, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which is where I practice, I'm a member of the bar, we had a DA here who is a supervisor, a top DA in the district attorney's office of Philadelphia, which is a big city. When new DAs come in, right, and here's how you shape them immediately. He was in such a high position that he trained other district attorneys. In that training, when they come in, he says, let's talk about jury selection, because this is where the case is won or lost. And here's what you need to know about jury selection. And what I'm about to say may offend some of you on the phone, but it's important that you hear it, all right? Here's what he says. And this is almost a quote, but you can listen, but it's probably going to be worse when you hear it come from this DA. This DA is a white male and one of the top DAs in Philadelphia County. He says to a room full of prosecutors, most harmful is that some of these are new prosecutors who are coming in and just learning out of the gate. And they're looking at a very successful prosecutor, tell them what they need to become successful in. And here's what they said to him in training. When you get a jury, when you get a group of people, there could be 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 people in the room. Here's how you eliminate people when you want to go to trial. You want to get rid of the black person. And here's why. Because they get to understand things, you know, they can give the ghetto guy, the defendant, a break because they get to understand. They don't trust the police sometimes. So you want to get rid of the black person. And also, some of the women, you know, they can be more empathetic. They might know the defendant might look like their son, so they might want him gone as well. And then it says also, you want to eliminate people, you know, who are overweight, because when they sit there, they'll get tired and they'll get mad at the government because the government is putting on a case that takes a long time, like a week or two or however long.
Wow.
They might hold that against the government.
It's terrible.
So in that process, that's supposed to be fair, right? To determine someone's life and death, we have removed African Americans. We've removed people of color. We've removed, and then he talks about a section of the city. We've removed people who live in a certain part of town, often in the county where this happened. We've removed them from serving on the jury. We've also removed people by their physical appearances. The upshot is we want to get people who are well-to-do, who are ideally white, or come from these counties where are more well-to-do. And when you look at the socioeconomic status and the zoning in this country, you can tell by the counties where there will be people that are white or well-to-do. And that's what they want, because they understand, and when I say they, I do mean the legal system, which I am a part of. We understand, quite frankly, that if you want to convict someone or sentence them to death, the first thing you want to do is dehumanize them. And then you want to eliminate and make sure you don't get anyone that understands their story. Because when you do that, when people start to understand their story, they can start to treat them more fairly. And we don't want that. So Jack McMahon is his name. You can look him up on YouTube. You can Google it. It's Jack. It's spelled, last name is McMahon. You can look him up. Look at the YouTube clip, and you will be, your mouth should be wide open. And you should realize this is a person who's a highly successful prosecutor. And these are the tactics he used for many years. I use this as an example to just tell you about Philadelphia, a big city, filled with African Americans, and is on the East Coast. The point here being, even though Sabrina's case came from Mississippi, do not think this is a Mississippi problem. This is not a country problem. This is not some Southern problem. This happens literally in every state in the country that still has a death penalty. And we have to appeal the case all the way to the Supreme Court. And sometimes when the United States Supreme Court takes a case, we've seen many cases lately being reversed because of the jury selection. So the jury selection also plays a factor. So again, we can see how race plays in both at the beginning of the case, during the case, and at the end of the case. As a lawyer myself, let me describe to you what court really looks like practically. Most people get to walk around, and we just walk past these courthouses, and they're these big giant buildings that take up the whole city block. They have very fancy words chiseled on them, sometimes in Latin because it's real fancy, right? And when you walk into these buildings, you see marbles and you see pictures of men who have been there 200-300 years, and they're looking pretty cool. And they're just they look like they're justice, right? Whatever that means. But and you walk into this courtroom, you go through the stairs, you walk into these courtrooms. I literally practice in courtrooms where there are red carpets. They're quite majestic, they're quite majestic. And some places we call them the halls of justice, we call them the palaces of justice. They are this big, grandiose buildings, and they clean them and they look great, and it's fancy, and it's all of its glory. And it's there for a reason. When you're a lawyer, but even as a lawyer, when you walk into these buildings and you go up the steps, you walk down the marble hallway, you walk into the courtroom, you go to the front, there's a bar there that prevents the public from wherever else, from everybody else. We walk through, we sit in these chairs, and then we look up because the judges sit higher. We also look and we see another higher level for the courtroom bailiffs. We see they sometimes call the courtroom deputy, the clerks, and the like. They're there. And you have a courtroom filled with different court personnel. And you walk into this courtroom, particularly as an African-American lawyer, you sit there and you feel small. The room, the entire hall, the entire judicial process is designed to make you feel small because the law is bigger. In those rooms and in those settings, from the moment you walk into the building and you go through security and you're searched, you go into the hallway and you see other lawyers. Mm-hmm. And then you get into the courtroom and you see the courtroom deputy. You see the U.S. Marshals or the sheriff or the bailiff. You see the police officers. You see the courtroom clerks who work for the judge. You see the judge's staff. You see the judge. You see the prosecutor. And in fact, you see the defense lawyer. Those people that you see overwhelmingly are all white. And overwhelmingly and disproportionately, the people brought into the courtroom, they're Black. They're people of color. They're Latinx. So even as a lawyer who's feeling very small in this space, who has to navigate a space where, whether it's the judge sitting there thinking you're the defendant, I've been in courtrooms many times where a prosecutor or a lawyer on the other side who doesn't know who I am walks up to me, asking me questions as if I'm the defendant. Like, oh, where's your lawyer? I am the damn lawyer. Mm-hmm. But this is a lawyer who's inherently racist, right? Because they meant no disrespect, but they walked up and for some reason didn't occur to them that this guy wearing a relatively nice shirt and tie and in his suit is a lawyer. Wow. They think, okay, if I'm not the defendant, I'm a probation officer. So what is that thing that makes them think that this person who's in this space has to be something that's less than a lawyer or someone who's in a position of influence of some sort? So imagine as a lawyer going through that, when a person whose life is on the line comes into that room, where their lawyer is white, where the government lawyer is white, the judge is white, the bailiff is white, the clerk is white, every real member and every real official looking person who's doing justice to you are white. It is very foreign and it is very intimidating and it makes you very small. But that is the criminal justice system, particularly in death penalty cases. It is very isolating, and that's the perspective that a client has. So a client walks into this room, and all they see is a sea of white faces, except when they're in the jails, and that is very, very difficult. So those are generally some of the numbers. Those are generally some of the issues that you see in this capital cases and death penalty system. And I hope it influences how we got here and how it's still, even though we heard Sabrina talking about how this happened, in the 90s, this happens till today. It happens currently. I don't mean today in some kind of a metaphor. I mean quite literally, it happens today. If we can talk about wrongful convictions for just a second. Leading causes of wrongful convictions appeared exactly in Sabrina's case. And one of it is prosecutorial misconduct.
Yeah.
That means the government did something to hide the ball from you, to prejudice you. For instance, when you do an autopsy, when you have information that what happened to this person's child is a medical condition, not something that is a crime, but yet you don't give that evidence to the other side so that they would know, that is prosecutorial misconduct. We're not supposed to try people by ambush in this country. This is based on our taxpayers. We give money to the government to have all these fancy labs, medical labs. We pay medical examiners. We pay them not so that they can lie to us. We pay them so they can do an effective job, get it done, and give it to the parties involved in the case. So when you hide that kind of evidence, which we call exculpatory, the term for it, that's terrible, and it leads to wrongful convictions, and it happens in cases over and over again. We also heard the case about bad lawyering. It happened. And it happens because we are also in a system, unfortunately, that doesn't properly often fund lawyers to represent people charged with serious offenses. Just in the South, even in Pennsylvania, in many states, you will see a cap. So basically, under our Constitution, when someone is charged with a crime and they cannot afford a lawyer, we're supposed to provide them with a lawyer. And you can imagine in a capital case, we should do that. Because they're not, these people, a person charged with a serious offense does not have the experience to represent themselves in the law. And there's also another saying in the law that even I, as a lawyer, I would never represent myself. It is a very stupid thing to do. A lawyer that represents him or herself has a full client. So lawyers don't represent themselves, but certainly most people charged with offenses shouldn't represent themselves anyway. We have a system that just gives a cap, like, oh, here's $5,000, represent this person case. When in reality, if you have a DUI case, most lawyers will not even pay $2,000 a year. A good DUI case, you could end up paying $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, or even higher, let alone in a case when someone's life is on the line, the government is paying someone about $65 an hour to represent that person and has a cap on it. These are systemic and structural issues. We've talked about some of the racism issues that are embedded, both in the decision to decide whether we charge someone with the death penalty or not, and how we pick a jury, and also how that jury is composed and how that means someone get a death sentence. We've also talked a little bit about the reasons of it, which is prosecutorial misconduct, some even bad lawyering, And also eyewitness identification is another reason, is another leading cause of wrongful convictions. When you add all of this up, it should not surprise you of that alarming statistic that was at the end of Just Mercy, which I just mentioned, which is 10% of the people who were sent to death in this country, are exonerated. That is an alarming statistic, but it's very real. And that's why we're just so lucky to have someone like Sabrina Butler-Smith join us today, because it's not an academic thing. It is a real life thing. And if she were not here today, just imagine the kind of impact it would have on her family, her friends, and we would not be able to hear this amazing story about her daughter graduating just on Friday. And I was very happy to hear that on Friday too. Sabrina.
So you talked about exonerations, and I know nationally we are at 169 individuals who've been exonerated. What's happening in Pennsylvania in terms of, are we sentencing more people to death? Are we not? What's going on here?
So the trend we see in Pennsylvania is similar to what we see in many states around the country, is that there has been a decline in death sentences. So we're not sentencing people to death really anymore. In just the last few years. What we have right now in Pennsylvania is what we call a gubernatorial moratorium. And all that means is that the governor of Pennsylvania has received many reports from studies of the death penalty, has in fact reviewed an Auditor General's report that just came out, I think, quite frankly, just came out this week, perhaps Monday or Tuesday came out, has reviewed it and saw that the death penalty is quite frankly a waste of money. So the governor looked at all of these things, saw that it didn't make us any safer, looked into it, and so we can invest some of this money into community resources, helping people, tackling the causes of crime, right? And not just punishing people for, in an excessive way that doesn't help society. So we're not executing anyone in Pennsylvania. The last time we executed someone in Pennsylvania was in the 90s, and they are people we call volunteers. These are people who are on death row, who have been there for quite a very long time, who simply want to give up all of their appeals and say, you know what, I'm tired of living. I don't want to do this anymore. Please, 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 please kill me. And you have to understand that they're driven there, not by choice. They're driven there because they're in solitary confinement. They're spending 23 hours in a cell, that's 6 by 9. They've had a tortured existence. They have been tortured, not just physically, not just intellectually, but the psychological impact of it has broken them down, that they would just simply rather die. And because of that, they waive their right to appeal, they waive their right to post-conviction, and they just say, you know what, kill me, and they volunteer to be executed. And that's how executions happen in Pennsylvania. But the decline that we've seen in death penalty has happened across the country. Americans are learning and seeing that this is a terrible system to have a country in which, particularly a country like ours. And I mean that as in, we live in a country that has a history of slavery, a country in which after we got rid of slavery on paper, it continued in practice of involuntary servitude. And after we left that era of involuntary servitude, we moved into an era of Jim Crow laws, which is laws that really just segregate society, where Blacks would be using substandard things. For instance, they called it separate but equal, but it was separate, it wasn't equal. Blacks would go to terrible schools that were underfunded with no books, whereas whites would go to different schools which were properly funded. Public spaces, Blacks couldn't stay in hotels. They couldn't drive in certain parts of the city. They certainly couldn't live in certain parts of the city. So they were marginalized politically, economically. Their right to vote was largely meaningless. They were not represented, right? So we were in that era that also involved lynching people. So it's not just killing people, shooting people, terrorizing people. It's terrorizing them by lynching them, literally stringing them up on a tree. And it wasn't just the act of killing. It was done in a way that it was celebrated. Literally, families would come around with their children to watch Black people being strung up on a tree.
Mm.
That happened in many states, not just southern states, northern states as well. It is not a southern problem. It is an American history, not just a southern history, rather. So these are, to live in that country and then to have a death penalty system, which eliminates Blacks in a very systemic way, based on that history, that continues to eliminate minorities in a very systemic way and kill them at an alarming rate more than any other group of people, just shows that we haven't gotten very far. Just shows that this legacy of slavery is still there. We just call it something else. It's just updated and it's just coded in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
The good thing, at least in Pennsylvania and many states, there's a major decline in death penalty. Some states, like Pennsylvania, now has a moratorium in place. But who knows? If the governor, who's in his second term right now, if he leaves, that governor can start signing death warrants and executions can start to happen. In fact, as this country right now has been dealing with a global pandemic, states are starting executions, right? So just think about that for a moment. We're trying to figure out how to get PPE to frontline responders like our wonderful doctors and healthcare workers and many other people who are working during this time. And states are thinking, oh, let's make sure we execute people. Like, that's what's happening. But fortunately, I think the public is learning more about how the system works, and there's been a decline in it.
Wow.
So, Akin, if you were to give someone advice about what they could do to end the death penalty, what would you say?
Whew. Well, first, if they're on this call, on this meeting, I think first it's to say thank you. The biggest thing one can do is to be educated about the subject, right? Because what Sabrina does day in, day out, testifying before legislatures, speaking to audiences, and the small part that I do, which I do for a living in terms of working, is important. But the truth is, it's nothing amazing, right? If people knew what I knew, I am pretty convinced that they would hold a similar position, right? And we've seen that both in terms of our justices, those of them who came into court, who supported the death penalty. Once they learned more about it, they changed their minds and became, they found it to be not constitutional. What you don't get to see typically is someone who was anti-death penalty, so to speak, and then became pro-death penalty. You see, pro-death penalty, to learn more about the issue. So the biggest issue is education. And as evidenced by your presence here today, that shows a willingness to learn about how the system works. So it's really learning. First thing is to learn how the system works. Not just about the death penalty, but your criminal justice system. And once you educate yourself about it, I think the next thing is to educate your loved ones and other people. Mm-hmm. That's important. The next thing is, because the way we see action in this country is to vote. Is that when we vote, and we have an election coming up in November, we, not just for the presidential election, district attorney's election, which they're not sexy, no one knows a district attorney, but these are important elections. They're very important because they govern. So look up your district attorney. If you are anti-death penalty, ask your district attorney candidates what their position is on the death penalty. It tells you about their view of justice in this country and what it should mean. It tells you their view as to human rights and civil rights. And if your view is that we don't deserve to kill other human beings, and we shouldn't show people it is wrong to kill by killing them, and you don't want to risk the very real risk of causing 10% of innocent people like Sabrina to be executed, then that perhaps is not the candidate you should support. Because otherwise, that is the candidate you will support, and they will be killing in your name. And that's really it. It's literally killing. It's not something that's academic. They will kill people. And so you educate yourself, educate your loved ones, be engaged politically. And also, I would recommend something you can do quite literally starting today. Find out and join a civil rights organization. An organization, whether it's Pennsylvania's Alternative Death Penalty, whether it's Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, or any other organization of your choice. It doesn't really matter. I'm just naming some right now. The important thing is to join. And when you join, you will be educated about it. And rather importantly, you will also be able to start learning to take actions about it. Someone has asked whether there are particular candidates. There are candidates in different states, right? And it's a great question. I know in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, candidates like Larry Krasner, who was elected, in a very thoughtful approach to criminal justice. There are candidates down south, but also in the federal system, right? There's a death penalty, so don't forget about that. There's a federal death penalty. And in fact, Attorney General Barr wanted to start executing people a few months ago. And he might get that issue very soon, but that issue is still currently before the courts and it's still being litigated. So it would be looking at candidates very seriously and asking them what their position is, or looking at their websites, asking other people, talking to lawyers that are your friends, and asking them, hey, listen, I've got this DA in my county, I've got this senator running for office. Do you know their position on civil rights issues? Do you know their position in death penalty? Because those issues, because it's not only about the death penalty. The death penalty is simply a microcosm of what it is, of our criminal punishment system and how the legal system works.
Thank you, Akin. Ms. Butler-Smith, you've been part of repeal campaigns across the country. What's your experience been in terms of what is it that will make a difference between a winning campaign and a we didn't make it this year campaign?
I think, to be honest with you, I really think that, now this is just my saying, I think that, you know, in order to make a change, we have to really overhaul the whole system. And one idea I had with doing this as far as the campaigns, we really need to get out and educate the public as far as who is wanting to run for office, see what kind of track record they have, and then go in. And also, as far as the court system, I'm kind of getting off a little bit, but I was wanting to say that what if they had it where if a crime is committed, that you don't know the race of the victim and you don't know the race of the perpetrator? Do you think that it would make a better change as far as the way the system sends African Americans, locking African Americans up? If the public did not know the victim, the race of the victim or the race of the perpetrator. And I feel like if we did that, then it might change a lot. I don't know how you would really put it into play. That's just an idea that I had. And I think that a lot of racism that we've had over the years, I mean, it's just, we need to make a change in this. We need to fix it to where we won't keep having the same things over and over again. If we don't screen our candidates and we don't see who we're putting in office, then how are we going to change? If you got somebody in there that has the same racist views and all this, whether they're black, white, green, purple, I don't care what color they are, if they still have the same racist views, then how is anything going to change? Nothing is going to change if you don't know who you're putting in office.
And Sabrina, you raised a very fine point, and
yes,
I would implore people to think about this. If I gave you a list of 15 cases that I have, that are capital cases,
right,
and I wrote down the crimes that these people have been accused of committing, okay?
right.
If I tell you, hey, they committed this crime, here's the number of people that died in the process, here's how much money got lost, whatever it is, I give you all the facts about the crime.
Right.
Do not tell you the race of
the people
or the race of the victim. Here is what I would tell you. You will absolutely have no clue who got the death penalty or not.
That's what I'm trying to say.
That's exactly. In fact, if you were to guess which one of the people got the death penalty, you would be wrong. Because if I told you this person killed 6 people and this person killed one person, you might think in your head, oh, of course it's the person killed the 6 person got the death penalty. But you're likely going to be wrong. Because when you pick these cases, as the case of people that I have myself represented, in cases that I have studied, the driving force again, it is the race of the victim.
It's the race. That's right. So why don't you take that element out? The government needs to take that element out. Then I think that this justice that we seek for people who do wrong things or the people who are innocent or whatever, I think you would have a better chance at getting the right guys and not locking up innocent people. You know what I'm saying? And then get rid of the death penalty altogether, because first of all, people don't walk around and they don't say, oh man, I'm not going to commit this crime today because I'm going to get the death penalty. Nobody does that. Where do they do that at? No one. No one does that. No one cares how much it costs. So why do we even have that? We could put that money into schools. We could put that money into the roads, for crying out loud. I'm in Memphis, Tennessee. They got 1,000 potholes. It's crazy. I mean, we could do so much more with the money. What about homelessness? You know what I mean? It's a lot of other things that we could be putting that money in instead of creating warehouses to lock up a bunch of black people. It don't make sense. It just doesn't make sense to me when we can do something to make the system work for us. And that's why I feel so low when it comes to that, because I feel like a lot of people don't want to change the status quo. They really don't. They like it just like it is. And that's the sad part. That's the sad part.
You said one of the most important things, which is having it work for us.
Yes.
The problem with having it work for us is because us is not really part of us.
Yeah.
The system has never intended to work well for minorities. The reason, in part, that I think we were comfortable in swallowing this 10% poison pill is because the brunt of the criminal justice system falls on people of color. If it didn't, then we would care to fix it. We're not fixing it because the people who are being punished by it are people of color. The people who are being executed are people of color. The people that are being sentenced to death are people of color. The people who are being sentenced to prison a lot longer are people of color. We see that in our drug laws, where people who are charged with cocaine crimes and crack cocaine crimes are being treated differently, even though it's the same chemical substance.
And that's that. You know what? To me, to hear those type of things over and over again, it hurts. It hurts because I don't understand why we as a race of people are hated just because of the color of my skin. Man, I didn't tell my mother or my daddy or whoever what color I wanted to be. We have no choice. Nobody has a choice of what color they want to be. It does not make sense to me. I feel like, this is what I feel like, starting from Adam and Eve. We're all kin to each other, regardless of if we want to believe that or not. We all are. I believe that that we all were one color at first, and I believe in the Bible. Now, this is me. You know, I'm saying this for my personal views, because I believe in God. I believe that we were all one race of people, and we tried to create the gates or the bridge or the tower or whatever it was to heaven. God knocked it down and split all the races. But I still feel like we're all one people, and people don't see it like that, but I do. And it's sad that, you know, people are hated because of the color. Everybody don't hate everybody, but a lot of people do. And it's sad. It shouldn't be like that. Because, I mean, all I want to do is just live. I get along with you. You get along with me. I don't care what color. You can be purple. It doesn't matter to me. As long as you treat me good, I'm going to treat you good. Simple as that. That's the way I am. And it's sad that we have to even have these type of conversations to say, okay, well, racism this, and people out there, they protesting, they're doing this kind of stuff. It's always race wars and riots, and people getting killed and all this kind of stuff. It don't make sense. It really don't. That don't make sense.
Thank you. There's a great question in the chat. Any suggestions about what to do when you're called for jury duty and you are asked if you oppose the death penalty? And then if you
Okay,
say
pause me.
yes, you're rejected. Well, I think let's
Okay,
Aiken do
yeah,
this.
thank you.
No, I was going to say, well, Aiken, let's start with you. I don't know that you would ever be seated on a jury anyway because you're
Yes,
an.
I am. Oh, yes, ma'am.
No. I was talking about Aiken, about whether they would.
Oh, I wanted to tell you that story though, because
Okay.
that
Okay.
shocked me.
Well, you know what? Now
Soon
I can't wait. Now you have to tell us. We'll go back to Aiken.
Okay, excuse me. As soon as I got off death row, do you know I got called to jury duty on the same jury in the same courtroom that sentenced me to death?
Oh my gosh.
Same.
Really?
I was shocked. I was floored. I couldn't believe it.
Wow, that's interesting.
Same jury. I'm like, are you serious? Are you really serious?
Oh,
Oh my God. Now go ahead, Aiken. I'm sorry to cut in on her question. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Oh no. That's very alarming. Yeah. I mean, I can't even imagine all the emotion that was going through. At the time, it's just quite shocking. Yeah. I mean, it's a very good question about the what to do when you're called for jury duty. So this helps talk about the jury system again, about the system we have in place. In capital cases, if you tell the court that I am pro-death penalty, you can be seated. If you tell the court I am anti-death penalty, that's a red flag and you're likely going to be bounced off of it. Think about that for a moment. We remember we talked about how we're picking 12 random people to decide this person's fate, whether they're sentenced to death or not. Automatically up front, we've said everyone that sits on that jury must be comfortable with the execution of this person. So that means we've removed a segment of the population, whether it's for religious reasons, whether it's for philosophical reasons, whether it's for moral reasons, whether it's political reasons. We've said, you know what, if you're against the death penalty, you can't serve. So if you're called to jury duty, I think one needs to take an approach of thoughtfulness, which means is that one can say, the rule is you must be able to consider the death penalty. You were never required to impose the death penalty. So the answer is, yes, I might oppose the death penalty, but I'm willing to consider it in this case. I'm willing to consider it because it's the law in my state. I'm willing to consider it because it's the law in the country. So if you're asked, the answer is quite frankly, yeah, I can consider death penalty. But if you're adamant up front that I cannot consider death penalty, what that means is you're bounced and you're not going to be a member of that community. So again, you can see that the criminal justice system has funneled things narrowly even more so that people just be shipped off to death row.
I have a dear friend who says that if he were ever called to jury duty, that what he would be able to say is that if the prosecution could convince me that that's the appropriate sentence, then yes, I could impose the death penalty.
I think that is absolutely spot on. It is a wise response, and that is an appropriate response, and that should be said over and over again. If the government can convince me that it is the appropriate sentence, I will vote to impose it. That is the right thing to say at jury duty. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think it has the advantage of being true, which is also.
No, correct. It might be an impossibility, but that is exactly right. Because at the same time, when we, some people think, because I've had this while I'm in court, someone who is opposed to the death penalty will be there, and they feel very comfortable saying, no, sir, I can impose, I'm against it. It's a terrible system. It's awful. And it's like, that's not helpful. What's helpful is to say, listen, you would hear all the evidence. You could still hold your views, but you can just say, I can wait to hear all the evidence, and then I will do whatever fits with my conscience, and will not just do it automatically up front. So that is something that quite frankly, that is the truth. You should say, yeah, I hold my beliefs, but I will hear everything. And if you convince me that I should vote to kill this person, yeah, then I'll vote to kill this person. If you don't convince me that I should kill this person, then I will not kill this person.
So thank you. Sabrina, you were talking about when you were released that you were called for jury duty in the exact same court. And one of the questions we had earlier is, what has it been like adjusting to I guess, the real world after your terrible experience? And so you gave us one example. Tell us some more about what it's been like.
Well, it took me like 10 years actually to try to come to grips with being free. Just because they opened the doors, it still was a race to try to, nobody would give me a job. I had a hard time trying to get work. And the only reason that I stayed, sane enough was I had friends that I could stay with. That was the part, that's the part that people don't look at. When you're exonerated, people don't look at the fact, oh, she's free. I've been told, you're free now, so don't worry about it. How could I not worry about it? Because you still have this on my record. It was until 2014, even though I was exonerated, to get this off of my record. And then in 2000, before 2014, in 2009, the governor passed a law, the mayor, in Mississippi for exonerees to receive compensation for wrongful conviction. But the way they paid me was that it was actually like a person working and you get paid by the year. So therefore, that wasn't enough for me to, do what I needed to do. They gave me what they felt like my incarceration was worth. But I don't think that was right. You know what I mean? Because I still had to struggle through this whole thing and still struggle. That's just the way it is. Right now, today, I'm still fighting Mississippi concerning my son's death certificate, because once I found out where he was buried at, I had to go and get his death certificate because I wanted to see, what was on it. The death certificate said he was murdered. Okay. You put me in prison for a crime I did commit, and you're still constantly making my life a living hell by having something like this on my son's death certificate. So I got an attorney to go in and challenge the death certificate. Number one, I shouldn't have to do that. I didn't commit no crime. Why am I still having to fight you for your mistake? This is not my mistake. This is your mistake. If I can't be a nurse, if I wanted to be a nurse, who's going to hire me or who's going to let me in on a job like that, taking care of children or anything else like that, with that written on my son's death certificate? I'm having to, and that right there is stressful to me because I have children. I also today have a 17-year-old daughter that has the same exact thing that my son died from. So you can't tell me that no amount of nothing that you do can fix that. You feel me what I'm saying? Nothing can fix what you have done to me. Nothing can fix it, because this is my life, and the only reason that I think I make it through is to be able to speak like I'm doing, because this is my therapy right here, in order to be able to just talk to the world and say, look, hey, this happened to me, and it can happen to you in the blink of an eye. And that is the only way I can make it, as far as mentally is concerned, because of nothing else is working as far as them helping me, because I wanted an apology. I didn't get that. You know what I'm saying? So it's hard. It's hard, but I think I'm making it through the grace of God. That's all I can say. And my family. That's all I can say.
I'm just pausing because that's so powerful. So what other questions do we have from the group? I'm going to scroll back. We had a few. Someone was asking if we were having other events, and I think Margaret answered that yes, we're going to be having a reading group, and we'll be posting more information about that. Yes, the comment about our current Attorney General. So in Pennsylvania, the way to abolish the death penalty is through the legislature. And the role of the district attorney is an interesting one in Pennsylvania. There are things that office is responsible for that don't make a lot of sense. And then there are others that you wonder why they don't. So it's a very strange thing. My belief is that Attorney General Shapiro has the power to make significant change with regards to the death penalty. I think it's important that we let him know that we believe the death penalty is wrong.
Yeah.
And the state attorney general isn't someone that hears from voters very often. In fact, many people don't realize it's an elected position. And the same thing for district attorneys. You know, we vote for them. Not all states do that. And we also vote for judges. And the people that you put on the bench will be there for a long time. So that's also important as well. Sorry, I was squinting to try to read what Akin had said. If you would like to share your contact info with us and you're from another state, we can hook you up with your state-based organization. I think I have emails from most of the folks that are here, but if you are from another state and you wanted us to connect you with a group there, you can just put that information in the chat and we'd be happy to help you with that. Okay, well, we are just about out of time. I want to thank you both so much for sharing your stories. Sabrina, I am so impressed that you have been able to make a life for yourself after that horrible experience. And it sounds like you have a lot of hope for the future.
I do. I do. I do. Especially watching my little one graduate. That is amazing. So that's what makes me happy, you know?
That is amazing. Oh, and you know, I wanted to ask, you have a book and I believe it's called Exonerated. And I tried to figure out where we could purchase that. I wanted to put it in the chat and I was unsuccessful. Can you fill us in?
Okay, as far as my book, I wanted to say I had stopped the first edition because a lot has transpired in my life since then. And I am currently on the second part. So I'm doing a second edition to my book. Once I do that, I will put it up on Facebook and let everybody know when the second one is coming out.
Terrific. And what's your Facebook? What's the name of your page on Facebook so we can find you?
Look, you can look up my main page, was Exonerated, the Sabrina Butler story. You can find me on there.
Okay. Terrific. Thank you. Akin, how about you? What is making you feel optimistic?
Right now, this is a good moment for us to be very resolute and to be very strong about civil rights, because it's not an issue of whether it's going to be peaceful or not peaceful. It's going to happen. It's about our existence at this point. And I think America is starting to realize it, because for the very first time, I think people are beginning to understand the issue that is Black Lives Matter. Not as an organization, not as anything else, but the idea that there is a cry because Black lives hadn't mattered at all in our country's history, whether it was through slavery, whether it was through the Jim Crow era, whether it was through segregation, whether it's through our criminal justice system. And certainly, when we look at the death penalty system, Black lives have never really mattered in this country. We were willing to accept all of the things about it where Black people's lives could be lost, they could be killed, whether legally or extrajudicially, and we were fine with it. And I think because of the moment we're in, America has been disgusted by it and ready to do something about it. So I'm feeling very optimistic, because when we look at these protests and we look at these marches, the focus of them and how diverse they are, both in terms of age, race, generational, that has been very inspiring to me. As Sabrina mentioned earlier, it's not even just in the United States. We see it in the UK and we see it in many other across different continents. So I'm feeling very optimistic that this moment, it will bring some changes, some much needed changes. However, they need to be structural changes, big time changes. The gradual changes hasn't worked over time because they haven't done it. We have many things. We get reports. We serve in different commissions, and we write a report and another report after that, and another report after that, with no changes. So I'm optimistic that this moment will bring some changes. The pessimism or the opposite of that is we've been in this moment before, although not this big of a moment. We've been here before. So there's the frustration that this is familiar to many of us who've done this work for a decade and more. But this moment is special, and I am glad that I am part of it. I am glad that everyone who has joined us today across these different platforms are part of it, and that civil rights does matter. And apathy is no longer an option. It's no longer an option just to observe and be silent. We have to join in and be on the right side of history and on the right side of civil rights.
Yeah. All
Thank
right.
you. That's great. Any final words from you, Ms. Butler-Smith?
I thank everybody for listening to us, and I just hope that with the information that we gave or that you know about, we could take these to our leaders and start trying to press the issue and let them know, hey, look, we need to take a look at this, and we really need to do something about it, because talking about it and not doing nothing about it ain't worth a hill of beans. So, I mean, let's do something. Let's change this, you know, and make this world a better place, which it should be for our children that's coming up. Because right now, what do they have? What future do they have the way it stands? I mean, somebody tell me, what future do they have if we don't do something about it?
Thank you. Thank you, Akin. Thank you, Sabrina. Thank you all for attending. And if you have questions, you can always reach out to PADP. You can just email info@PADP. And I saw some folks in the chat were asking to be connected with the NAACP and other organizations in their state. So we'll make sure that we do that. And again, thank you for coming, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
All right, see you later.
I got it.